The media does remember Ron Paul. It's only to reassure themselves how there's no need to remember Ron Paul.
Right now, live, right next to the bus behind us, Ron Paul is speaking. And 7 of the candidates are here today. We have live pictures of Ron Paul, but you know what? We're talking about Sarah Palin, we're talking about Rick Perry, the 2 people not in the race yet, Drew.
And guess what, Paul? If you get video of Sarah Palin or get a soundbite from her, bring that back to us. You can hold the Ron Paul stuff.
Jon Stewart, a little montage last night about the media diss of Ron Paul. It is interesting to me that even the beta boys at CNN, the network of beta boys and bitchy broads, somehow feels comfortable dissing Ron Paul. These guys don't stick their necks out, even if their last name is Turtle, but they feel comfortable dissing Ron Paul. Now, you kind of expect that from CNN or MSNBC, the 12-term kook from Texas. But Fox News going out of their way to make sure that Ron Paul doesn't even register on the radar. I guess they got their talking points from the NRCC or the RNC or whoever else is telling them to see what they want them to see and say what they want them to say. Someone who has a lot to say about this joining us on the program is Jack Hunter, the Southern Avenger. He is the campaign blogger for the 2012 Republican presidential candidate Ron Paul. He's also a longtime radio host and the American Conservative Magazine columnist, and he produces a widely popular weekly video podcast. Joining us on the program, Mr. Hunter, welcome.
Good to be with you, Jerry.
I've been watching this and in some distress and amusement that particularly the Republicans, Fox News, just go out of their way to make Ron Paul a non-entity, a guy who came within 0.9 percentage point of knocking off Michelle Bachmann in the Iowa straw poll, but yet not even a mention on Fox of Congressman Paul's showing in Iowa.
Well, the media has their own narrative, Fox included, and anything outside of it that just starts to occur, they don't like it. They create the news. We heard about Tim Pawlenty being a front runner for how long? Why? Because he was perceived as a front runner. Well, the Iowa straw poll, first and foremost, even those who dismiss it will tell you, it proves who has the best organization, who's going to be an enduring force in any election cycle. Well, Ron Paul proved what Tim Pawlenty tried to. He spent his time there. He spent money there. And he had people, this wasn't an online poll, this wasn't a CPAC event where it's people from across the country. This was Iowans. This was evangelical voters. This is the people who are looking for somebody who's going to represent something far and away different from the status quo. Ron Paul did exactly what Tim Pawlenty wanted to do, and he almost won the whole thing. I'm sorry, but even if you don't like Ron Paul, you're Fox News or CNN, and you don't think he's a story, that's a story. And if you don't cover it, you're not doing your job. Jon Stewart hilariously pointed that out.
Yeah, it was a great montage you put together. Your piece, Who's Really Destroying the Republican Party? You might want to give me a little help here, Mr. Hunter, because I've been taking some heat for calling out the bucket carriers like Rush and Hannity and Levin and Gallagher and Medved for basically, I think, doing more damage to the Republican Party by cheerleading for them than the Democrats could ever hope to with the likes of George Soros and MoveOn.org. By allowing Bush to be a profligate spender, by allowing him to double the national debt from $5 to $10 trillion, by allowing him to expand the size and scope of government under the guise of compassionate conservatism, and they were there cheering him along the way. But now, all of a sudden, Barack Obama is the guy who has the spending problem, not George Bush.
Well, that's exactly right. Let me preface this by saying I became a conservative as a teenager by listening to Rush Limbaugh. He was my radio hero. But here we are in 2012, and heading into 2011, after the debate in Iowa last week, Rush Limbaugh went on his program and said, if people keep listening to Ron Paul, it's going to destroy the Republican Party. Well, I'm pointing out that no, George W. Bush and guys like Rush Limbaugh already destroyed the Republican Party. It's exactly what you said, Jerry. Nobody talked about the fact that we were doubling the size of government under Bush. Nobody talked about the fact that we were doubling the national debt or enacting things like Medicare Plan D, the largest entitlement expansion since LBJ, No Child Left Behind, which essentially doubled the Department of Education. Why? Because we were fixated on foreign policy and the Iraq War and so on and so on. And despite how you feel about the foreign policy issue, it is true that when that was our main focus, no self-described conservative cared about spending. And when Barack Obama ran in 2007 and 2008, he first positioned himself as the quote-unquote quote, peace candidate because he knew that was popular with American voters. So now that we have still a war in Afghanistan, still a war in Iraq, Obama started one in Libya, for Ron Paul to say it might not be a good idea to start a fourth war with Iran, Rush Limbaugh says listening to that perspective will destroy the Republican Party. I'm here to tell you, and I dare say that most American voters out there, if you put the question to them in that context, phrased it that way, do you want the fourth war with Iran and to still be in Libya and so on, more Americans would agree with Ron Paul than any of the other Republicans on that stage, and certainly Rush Limbaugh. And if the Republican Party doesn't start paying attention to what he's saying, they're going to lose again, and they deserve to do so.
And another thing I've pointed out, Mr. Hunter, is that you don't get a Barack Obama without the failures of a Republican Party. Now, I understand that this is 4 years of pent-up, radical 60s, collectivist, redistributionist ideology that's permeated Hollywood, textbooks, literature, music, art, and Capitol Hill. But you have to have the space created that gets filled by someone or some ideology, and the Republicans seriously dropped the ball. I mean, I keep watching Fox News go to Karl Rove, the architect of one of the biggest political ass-kickings in the last quarter century. I wouldn't want to be referred to as that architect that brought that political house down.
Well, that's exactly right, and you make a brilliant point, Jerry. We couldn't have got to this point unless we had George W. Bush. Barack Obama is building upon what his Republican predecessor did. This is what I like to do with some of my conservative friends who still sort of give Bush a little more credit than they should. Imagine we never had a George W. Bush. Imagine in 2000 that Barack Obama entered the White House. There was no Bush at all. Went from Clinton to Barack Obama. And he started the Iraq War, the Medicare Plan D, the No Child Left Behind, doubled the government debt. The whole entire Bush record belonged to Barack Obama. Do you think conservatives and the Republican Party and guys like Rush Limbaugh would have given that president a free pass?
No, absolutely not. They would have been on him from day one as they were on Obama from day one, and rightfully so in many cases because of the ideology of this president, which I believe is someone who is beholden to socialism and economic fascism, but not holding George W. Bush to the same standard when they had the opportunity to do it. I had Congressman Tom Price on the program when the Republicans were beating the drum about defunding Planned Parenthood. And I said to him, why didn't you guys do this when you had the White House, the House, and the Senate? He said, we should have. And I go, that's it? That's your answer? He goes, that's it. That's the answer. So things that they're saying need to be done now could have been done then. Things that could have been done then, they're blaming Obama now. And not without criticism, Obama is just taking a problem and supersizing it and making it way worse than Bush did. But the precedent was set by Bush.
That's exactly right. Barack Obama is a worse version of the George W. Bush. As bad a big government president as Bush was, Obama's worse. To rest on our laurels and say, you know, what's this silly billboard sign out there, miss me yet, with George W. Bush waving? No, I don't miss you, George W. Bush. I don't miss your party. I don't know that I can say that about most of the Republican contenders for president this year. You certainly couldn't say that about a guy like Mitt Romney or Rick Santorum, who guys like Limbaugh seem to still like for some reason. We need to get away from that. The reason we have this big government Democrat is because we had a big government Republican before him. And as you pointed out, we had control of the Senate and the House, or the White House, and nothing was done. The beauty about the Tea Party and the energy on the grassroots right now is they're seeing beyond the same old partisanship that has defined the conservative media and even the mainstream media. It's the reason CNN and Fox News and everybody else that Ron Paul almost won the Iowa straw poll. You know, everybody's looking for something that's not politics as usual. When they look at that Republican stage and they look at the Democrats and who's in the White House, all they see is politics as usual, except, I dare say, for one person, and that is Ron Paul. I'm sorry. That's the message.
And I look at Fox News saying, well, look how well Rick Santorum did. Rick Santorum did horrible, but Rick Santorum, I guess they forget, is the social issue suck-up candidate who backed Arlen Specter over Pat Toomey. Arlen Specter, one of three Republicans, Snow and Collins, the other two, who helped give us stimulus and TARP. And maybe with the 6,000 vote margin would have gone Pat Toomey's way had Santorum backed Toomey as opposed to backing Specter. And now we got Governor Goodhair down there, who to me looks like Arlen Specter with cowboy boots.
Rick Santorum told us in the Iowa debate the other night that the gold standard is a ridiculous idea, that the Federal Reserve does not need to be audited, and I think he hinted he wanted war not only with Iran but perhaps Venezuela. If you look at his actual record, you have a guy who every big government thing that happened under George W. Bush, Rick Santorum was that president's go-to guy. Tell the base that, I'm a religious guy, and I'm pro-life, but, we're going to push through No Child Left Behind. Who cares? As long as I'm that religious conservative. That's what Rick Santorum represents. Everything that's wrong with the Republican Party, look at Rick Santorum and you will find it. You're absolutely right. He is a big government Republican. He's not even a conservative through and through, as you point out, Jerry.
Jack Hunter is with us. He's the campaign blogger for the 2012 Republican presidential candidacy of Ron Paul. The website, ronpaul2012.com. So let me throw this at you, Mr. Hunter. One of my favorite movies is The China Syndrome, starring Jack Lemmon. And Jack Lemmon, for those of you not familiar with the movie, knew that there was something wrong with the nuclear reactor, but he was the guy that was bucking the trend. He was the one that knew something was wrong. But there were so many people that were so invested in the kickbacks and the bribes and the skimming and the shoddy construction that they couldn't let his truth be told. So they had to make him look crazier and crazier and crazier. And obviously the ending of that movie, certainly something we don't even want to discuss about with a potential political candidate. But I think most people know how the movie ended, and it didn't end well for Jack Lemmon's character. How does the character of Ron Paul go more mainstream when so many mainstream media outlets want to Jack Lemmon or want a China Syndrome Ron Paul?
That's a good way of looking at it. That's a great movie. Who's the only presidential candidate that predicted the housing bubble? Who's the only presidential candidate that said that the big cost we were going to pay in Iraq was not going to be worth it? Who was the only guy who predicted the current financial crisis? Everybody else up there are latecomers to the game. They're Tea Partiers all of a sudden. Who was just as critical of Bush as he was Obama? That's Ron Paul. To say Ron Paul is crazy on foreign policy or to say he's crazy on domestic policy is to say George W. Bush and Barack Obama are sane. I don't know many Americans, left or right, independent, who think that right now. And if you're looking for something that is outside of the status quo, why would you look to the status quo? What's Rick Santorum going to fix? If you're tired of politics as usual, why would you look to politics as usual? It doesn't make any sense. Mathematically, it's not even logical. So Ron Paul is very popular, not only because he was right and predicted all these sorts of things, but he has the consistency. Mitt Romney can be anything to anybody on any given day. Michelle Bachmann, there's things I like about her, but there's a lot of questionable votes there. Support for stimulus, for example. Rick Santorum, no use for him whatsoever. Rick Perry, there's a lot of questionable things in his background. We could go through all of them. If you want consistency and somebody who's been right from the beginning, and I say this not because I'm with the campaign, but the campaign hired me because I've been saying it as a radio host and a columnist for years. I'm sorry. Right. That's the reason Ron Paul's popular, whether Fox or CNN or any of the other media outlets like it.
Are some of the Ron Pauliacs a little bit too uptight? Because in my book, when I referred to Ron Paul, I put in parentheses, Kook, Texas, because that's how people refer to him. And it was put in there as a joke, but a lot of people were highly offended because I always put Democrat, Delaware, Republican, South Carolina. I put Ron Paul, Kook, Texas, just as kind of like an inside baseball kind of a joke. And a lot of people took offense at that. Are some of them a little bit too uptight?
Well, absolutely. And look, it's like this. Anytime somebody's passionate about a certain package of ideas, you saw it with Goldwater, you saw it with Reagan, you're seeing it with Ron Paul, you see it with his son Rand Paul, you're going to have people who are a little bit too passionate. I compared the Ron Paul movement to the Tea Party itself, and there's plenty of overlap. How often does the mainstream media say the whole Tea Party is crazy by focusing on some of the more passionate and probably crazy parts of the Tea Party? We see it all the time, right? Well, that also happens. I can tell you, being a part of this movement and just as passionate about Ron Paul as some of the people who are definitely kooky, they do tend to focus on some of the ones who are most outlandish to discredit the entire movement and the message, just like they do to the Tea Party. And that's always going to happen. It's inevitable, and I don't know what to do about it. So,
well stated. At the end of the China Syndrome, Wilford Brimley's character was asked about the character of Jack Lemmon, and he said, whatever the character's name is the sanest man I've ever known, smartest man I've ever known. And I think sometimes that could be applied to Ron Paul. His consistency is certainly something that he's got going for him. But what I do like about him is the fact that he is a man of principle. And in the ever-shifting line drawn in the ever-shifting sand of how people define themselves politically or stand by their ever-shifting principles, if anything, Ron Paul is consistent. And in politics today, I would have to think that's like finding the fountain of youth, because it doesn't seem to be something that exists too much today. Jack Hunter with us. Appreciate the time. Check out Ron Paul's website, ronpaul2012.com. You'll be able to follow Mr. Hunter's blogging, as he is the official campaign blogger for the Ron Paul 2012 presidential race. Appreciate your time, Mr. Hunter.
Thanks a lot, Jerry. Y'all take care.